best gamble. So, welcome.
Okay, great stuff.
We'll start straight away.
I can't see Mark on video.
No, he's gone now because he's just producing. It's just us.
All right, fine. Okay. Yep.
Right. Welcome once again to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast with the legendino Tim Vickery over in Rio.
With the night owl himself, Dotun in London, and a special guest making his return to the programme.
Indeed. One of the great football writers, both book-wise and newspaper-wise, Paddy Barclay, welcome back.
Thank you very much. You gave me an introduction like that last time, so I was always going to come back like a shot.
Of course. We know what we're doing.
There's not many people say. Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You might have figured out why we've asked you back just this week.
Mm-hmm. I have.
Yes, and not to make your hurt deeper than it is already, but you are going to have to put up with English fans for just a bit longer than you thought in these Euros. I'd have thought.
He's got a chance now to talk about a victory for Denmark. We're doing wonders for his morale.
I know. This is that's the second reason that I accepted the invitation with such alacrity, because Denmark, very quickly became the team of my heart, in this European Championship. Not only because my team, Scotland, made a surprisingly early exit, defying history, and but because not so much of the emergency, a medical emergency afflicting Christian Eriksen, but because that's something that's above football, but in football terms, because of the Danish reaction to it, playing as if numb at first, but somehow then finding the guts and football ability. They play wonderful football, in my opinion. To as we speak, remain in the tournament. I think they've been wonderful, and I wish them all the best against England. But as we said just before starting to record, I'd wish anybody all the best against England.
Well, we're looking at this game, this really momentous game in 1992, June the 26th, 1992. Nobody at the start of the Euros tournament, which is very different from the way the tournament is now, much fewer teams and so on, nobody would have given Denmark a snowball's chance in the heat of the Danish summers to win the occasion, let alone get through the sort of group stage as it was.
Which they didn't.
Exactly. This is they shouldn't have been in the tournament in the first place, which was the irony of this. And if it wasn't for the unraveling of what was then known as Yugoslavia, they wouldn't have been in the tournament at all. And yet they came and let's give away the ending. They beat Germany 2-0, a remarkable victory for them, given that it took us, as in England, sorry, Paddy, it took us 56 years to beat Germany in a knockout stage of a tournament. The Danes just came out of nowhere, small island or small nation as they are, island and mainland, to beat the mighty Germans. Should we take you back? So,
please.
The scene. It's Gothenburg, or Göteborg, as we Swedes say.
Göteborg, yes.
Indeed. And it's the Ullevi Stadium, where, by the way, I saw the Rolling Stones perform in what should have been their last concert sometime about 1980. So can you imagine how many times they've said, this will be our last tour ever since then?
Well, Dotun, I was there 3 years after you for Aberdeen against Real Madrid in the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup. Aberdeen, managed by Alex Ferguson, who gave Real Madrid a goal start, a penalty given away by Alex McLeish, his short pass back on a sodden pitch, and still went. Aberdeen still went on to win. An absolutely thrilling game, and a thrilling climax to it.
Were you there for this tournament in '92, Pat?
I certainly was. It was one of the greatest experiences I did 10 European Championships professionally, although obviously I've watched a lot more than that, but and 9 World Cups. And this was, up there with any tournament experience that I've ever had, not just because of the story that Dotun's outlined, the David and Goliath, or as we overused at the time, the Hans Christian Andersen story of Denmark's triumph, but also because it became a sort of template for the tournament and for hope in smaller nations. Croatia, for example, I'm sure took heart. I'm sure that the rise of Croatia, which followed the breakup of the Yugoslavia, which Dotun has alluded to, the emergence of Croatia and an even smaller population than Denmark, I'm sure they must have taken inspiration from that, as must Greece, who later triumphed and in the European Championship. So it is. I know we haven't finished this European Championship yet, but it has been a remarkably egalitarian tournament. There haven't been too many batterings. Perhaps Ukraine. Well, Ukraine definitely took one, and Turkey took 1.5, sort of, I suppose. But there haven't been many batterings, and every game has been competitive and enjoyable that I can remember. And I think that the Danes set a precedent there, and that they inspired the whole tournament. And we were sort of conscious of it at the time, because apart from anything else, they were well supported, with the proximity of Copenhagen to Malmö, and you just needed to get a ferry across to see the tournament. So they were well supported, and it would have been, I suppose, like Scotland getting the final of an English tournament. What?
It was an absolute home fixture, because
I
mean, there is some history to Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, which goes back obviously to the Second World War. Till today, the Danes feel somewhat aggrieved about the occupation of their country by Germany at the time. I know my aunt's father, who was a Danish farmer, he refused to allow her to marry any German. It was okay for her to marry this Nigerian bloke who's my uncle before. And if you think about those days, so that was like in the early 70s, she met my uncle, and he was very happy with, the union of Denmark and Nigeria. But if it had been a German, she told me subsequently, he would never have allowed it, because he suffered under that occupation.
But there are some fascinating aspects to that.
To be fair, Nigeria never occupied.
We were always Switzerland when it came to war.
Although I wouldn't rule it out in the future. Sorry, Tim.
There are some fascinating aspects to the German occupation, aren't there, of Denmark, because it's the place where the Danes taught the Germans not to be anti-Semitic. Like they wouldn't. The Danes just wouldn't go along with it.
I didn't know that.
And they kept on saying that I think the number of the Jewish population in Denmark that were saved is, I think it's higher than anywhere else. Whereas some countries, when the Dutch, for example, Anne Frank was hunted down by the Dutch police.
Yes.
France has a poor record as well. But Denmark, they're obviously upstanding, independent, very strong-minded, and they kept on telling the Germans, what you're doing is wrong. And some of the Germans, maybe it is wrong. It's I read a book about it, and it's a remarkable chapter, and it stands out as an exception of where the local population said, well, we're not really having this.
Can you remember the title of the book?
No, I can't.
I'm sure you could find, anybody who's interested in further study could find it.
It's a really interesting anecdote, which I didn't know. What I do know is that the Danes have always had the hump about the Swedes, and more so the Norwegians, because on the borders of Denmark and Sweden, the Germans gave the Swedes two options: either we invade you, or you let us march through Sweden to go and occupy Norway, which is a much more strategic country at the time. And the Swedes said, yeah, march through. And that was the great betrayal, if you like, of Sweden towards all the other Scandinavian countries at the time. So Denmark crossing over to Gothenburg. And by the way,
can you say Gothenburg again in Swedish? Because I thought that was great. I've never heard that before.
Göteborg.
Göteborg.
Yeah, indeed. And
I spent a lot of time in Sweden trying to ask girls out. So I had to.
Well, in those days, the Swedish girls were so popular. I'm not sure if they're as popular anymore, by the way. But just a final word: Gothenburg is the equivalent in Sweden of Copenhagen, because it is this laissez-faire city in a very sort of rigid Sweden, and people in Gothenburg is probably regarded like Scousers are regarded over here, to being, somewhat just a little bit more laissez-faire than the rest of
I can't believe they're that bad.
Yeah, they are actually. They are. I could give you some anecdotes, which I won't go into right now.
Right.
Anyway, so that's setting the scene, in a historical context and everything else. But then what happened on the day, on the field? Wow, was it a game of one particular goalkeeper?
Yes.
Before we get to the game, can we just go through the run a little bit?
Yeah,
because even them getting to the final is extraordinary.
Yeah,
and I think the coach Moller Nielsen, when they got this reprieve, and at the last minute they're coming in, they assemble, and Moller Nielsen says to the players, "We're going to the tournament to win it," and they laugh at him. It's preposterous. But I think, and I'd love Pat's opinion on this, that they had the draw. Gave them an immense favour, because their first opponents were Graham Taylor's England, who were shite.
Yes, they were.
Just a shout. Imagine a coach leaving out Chris Waddle at the height of his powers and Peter Beardsley.
Oh yeah, but there was Carlton Palmer more than made up for that.
So the first game is against England, who are seen as one of the glamour sides, even though they're a shambles.
It was the worst game of the tournament, 0-0. I saw it.
But Denmark came out of this thinking, you know what?
Yeah,
we were better.
We've drawn with.
So
England.
hang on, we just played one of the big teams who've done all the proper preparation.
Yeah,
and you know what? We were better than them, and I think that's a really important step. On the way to them thinking, when Moller Nielsen said we were going to win this, maybe he's got a point.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I agreed with Tim that it's quite worth dwelling on the build-up, because, and in particular Moller Nielsen, because I didn't know this at the time, because I suppose I'd been prepping Yugoslavia, and which didn't need much prepping. They were all the huge names, but so Moller Nielsen, came on us at the media in a bit of a hurry, but immediately made a hit. But he hadn't been a hit he wasn't a popular manager. It would have been like Graham Taylor at his weakest, or Roy Hodgson at his weakest, although they all, his job wears all the English down in the end. I hope it doesn't to this one. But it would have been like, one of these lame duck period English managers telling his players, you're going to win it. They probably, as Tim said, they laughed, but they might even have, thought he's really loopy. He has to go. He'd been under great pressure before the tournament, for about 18 months, I think. And he immediately arrived, but you could tell there was something from him at a very early press conference. Somebody must have given him a question like, it must be great to be here. It must be a wonderful surprise. He says, not for my wife, it isn't. And they said, why? And he said, well, I promised her I'd spend the summer fixing, doing a new kitchen. And she's hopping mad. I remember we thought, well, you better bloody win it then, or you're gonna get some frightful stick. But you thought, this guy's got something, and this ability to turn what might have been a sort of negativity or a feeling of inadequacy of not having been there. Of course, under the current rules, they'd have sailed in. They finished just behind Yugoslavia after winning in Yugoslavia, overturning their home result. So, there wasn't much. They weren't a bad side at all. And but they'd lost Laudrup, Brian Laudrup's brother, Michael, probably arguably the greatest Danish player of all time, because he'd fallen out with Nielsen. And Brian initially had to be called back into the fold. So they could have had a feeling of inadequacy of, let's win 2 or 3 games and then let's get back to the beach. But he somehow made the idea of tweaking these toffs' noses into a fun quest, and the what you might call a moral victory over England just underlined it.
There are so many comparisons from what you say now. That explains a lot to me with this current Danish side.
Yes, there
are. Because I forgot about Michael Laudrup not being in the squad when he should have been.
So they've lost their best creative player.
Indeed, that's exactly the comparison I was going to make. There is one thing in the history of Denmark. I'll give them this. They've never felt like they themselves have never felt like they were a small nation. No. It's not like Wales. They might have the same size population as Scotland, but they've never felt like they were a small nation. Indeed, in the Viking days, they were the most powerful of all of those Nordic countries. Can you believe that Denmark once ruled Sweden? Tiny little Denmark. Yeah, tiny little Denmark once ruled Sweden. And it was the Norwegian and Danish Vikings that came over here, not the Swedish Vikings. Swedish Vikings went. I'm comparing it to Swedes because Sweden has the largest population of 8 million people. It's now about 10 million actually. So it has twice the size of a population as Denmark. But actually, Denmark was the superpower. So they've never had this small country complex that a lot.
You see that in Schmeichel, the goalkeeper.
Yeah. Very arrogant, very cocky, very self-assured. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what they remind me sometimes? Some Danes have always reminded me of Dutch. They've got this. I mean, Schmeichel could be Dutch the way he swaggers about, couldn't he? Certainly, Schmeichel père, Schmeichel fils appears to be
very good.
more restrained, but no, I love Schmeichel.
Schmeichel fils is part English, though. To be honest,
he is. He certainly is. I remember him when he played for Manchester City towards the end of his career. I remember this kid bounding around, on match days, nicely behaved, and I remember thinking that boy must be English, really, although he spent a little bit of time in Portugal. But most of his life's been spent in England. And I'd love to say I thought that guy's going to win the title with Leicester one day, but I didn't.
Well, wouldn't it be
funny that you mentioned the Dutch? Because the game of the tournament was the semi-final, wasn't it? It was Denmark against the Dutch. And
it was. It was the best game by a mile, yeah.
Everything's put on a plate for the Dutch to win it. They've already beaten the Germans in the group phase.
They're champions as well, remember?
They're champions.
European champions.
They've got a bad World Cup in 1990 to react off. It's all set up for them.
Well, and they had a great team. I mean, when, the Danish players, I don't know if it was Schmeichel, somebody said, no, it was Brian Laudrup was saying that when they lined up, in the thing, and they looked across and they saw Hullet and Van Basten and Rijkaard, and they looked around at their own team and they thought, well, we're not bad, but we're not really quite in their league. So it was a fantastic team they were up against, and I agree with you. I thought that semi-final, which of course they only won on penalties, but Dotun, you were going to talk about, wouldn't it be? Because you were talking about the coincidences. I think you were going to allude to, wouldn't it be incredible if another Schmeichel
indeed
won the European Championship?
Wouldn't it be the kind of...
It would be the story of all time,
It would be.
It would trump Leicester.
Indeed, it would trump your prediction about him winning the league with Leicester. But no, there are so many things. It is drama that we witness. I mean, I was totally gutted for Christian Eriksen. So I'm not trying to minimise that at all. He's a player that I had a lot of
The whole
affection
tournament's
for.
missed him. Yeah.
Oh, of course. And he was a nice guy as well, by the way.
Was he?
The one time that I met him, he came across. Yeah,
Is a nice guy.
He's still with us.
Apologies.
But he was a fantastic player, who also happened to be a nice guy. Is what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, and he is a fantastic player until we know otherwise.
Well, I refuse to believe that he won't come back until somebody can prove it. I would like to think he could come back.
And if the Danish team are playing for Christian Eriksen, what better motivation could there possibly be than to play for your teammates, as well as your country who is grieving, as well as, Christian Eriksen's family who were there. His wife certainly was there when he collapsed, etc. But
I thought there was some terribly unfair criticism of the television people over that. I don't think they were intrusive at all.
I agree with you.
I think everybody's looking for a nasty motive in everything that everybody else does at the moment. I don't know why.
I think the television crew...
I don't know what your motive is for saying that, Pat. Well out of order.
But I do think
trust Figgery to lob it back over the net, leaving me helpless.
Do you remember once upon a time in football, they used to show the bust-ups on the pitch? They used to show this sort of argy-bargy between players, and now they just pan the camera away.
Don't even show the streakers.
I
know.
Those are the good old days, mate.
And this business, if you had any language that was inappropriate, if you had any language that was inappropriate, don't go to a football match. Not ever. Not in England, anyway.
Yeah, never. Ever.
Well, unless you go to Fulham, of course, that's different.
Well, I will say that even if you go to Fulham, try and keep your kids in the kids section, and even there, make them wear earmuffs.
Yeah,
but, it would be such a remarkable story if this happened. But they've still got a mountain to climb. Should we get back to the mountain that they had to climb in 1992? No need to apologise.
We'll probably take a few details before we wind up.
You said against the Netherlands in the semi-final, it was a 0-0 draw, went to extra time, still 0-0, and then penalty.
2-2.
Sorry?
2-2 it was.
Oh, apologies. Forgive me.
It was actually a thrilling game,
And you thought that Holland they're gonna win it. They're gonna win it. There was an inevitability about a third Dutch goal. It was going to happen, and it never did.
Yeah,
even after 120 minutes.
120,
yeah. And Marco van Basten, one of the greatest strikers of all time, is not the villain, because you can't attribute villainy to him whatsoever. But he's the guy that misses the penalty against Denmark, and gives them a passage to the final.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? How many great players have missed vital penalties in major tournaments. In fact, to try and find one who hasn't over the years, is very, very... Pelé, I don't remember him ever missing a penalty.
They didn't have penalty shootouts very often back then, did they?
No, they had only had penalties in open play, and I suppose they're from open play, and I suppose Jairzinho and others might have taken them, but you're quite right. There were hardly any penalties, but I don't know, but Baresi, the Divine Ponytail, Platini, Zico,
Maradona in one of the shootouts in '90.
Yep, Maradona. I mean, it's much easier.
Very recently.
Yeah. And I haven't even mentioned Gary McAllister. So there we go. Who's my favourite Scottish player. But anyway.
I remember as Stuart Pearce stepped up in 1990 thinking, well, we're all right with this one.
Yeah, exactly. He'll blast it. And Chris Waddle will do it with technique.
Well, if it goes to a penalty shootout, we know that we'll have our heads in our hands praying or whatever else we do. So So the final was on June the 26th, 1992. It was a Friday, a sunny Friday afternoon, Gothenburg. And again, I imagine when the Danish team lined up, although they would have been very familiar with the German team, when they lined up against them, they must have been looking, thinking, okay, we've done pretty well to get here, but look at that team. You know, look at the squad that they've got. What on earth are we going to do? And yet.
I mean, it was Tim. That was an outstanding German side. I mean, they had top players in. Well, Ilgner maybe wasn't a top goalkeeper. He was good. He was good enough though, and he didn't get a lot of work, even in the final. But they had good players in every position. I mean,
I was amazed when I looked back
Stefan
at the team
Reuter and
lineup.
Andreas Bremer.
And look at the central midfield. You've got Sammer, Effenberg, and Hessler in central midfield. That's ability.
With world-class wing backs either side of them, and you know, I mean, Kohler was at his peak there as well. Jürgen Kohler, because he wasn't great at Liverpool. Some English people or Fulham, he was decent, but no more. Don't realize what a top player Kohler was for 5-6 years at the peak of his career. You know, beautiful feet, but great in the air.
The only question mark that I would have against them is the coach, because Bertie Vogts was the coach who'd taken over from Beckenbauer, and I don't think he'd been a very good captain. Vogts when he was captain in '78, I don't think he was. There wasn't enough of a presence about him. So maybe that's the one thing that you could point to that German side and say, well, that could have been strengthened.
And yet, in the final, perhaps Denmark had something taken out of them. I mean, the European Championship we were watching now, it's so much about fitness, which is why England, in my opinion, will win it. It's so much about fitness and giving people the right games at the right time and so on. And inevitably, the Dutch, I beg your pardon, the Danes were possibly a little bit tired, and that's the way the game went. The Germans were energized, dominated the game. I don't know how many shots. I mean, I don't know if we had stats then.
In the first half.
They must have had 25, 30 shots, Germany. In the whole game.
Most of the game was being played in the Danish half, both halves. The Germans pushed up so high, which was their undoing at the end of it, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It was, because both goals came from counterattacks, as far as I can remember. Certainly the goal that sealed the game from Kim Vilfort. And I only found out this morning, or I was only reminded this morning of how poignant Vilfort's goal was, because he had a 7-year-old daughter at that time who had leukemia, and he left the squad for a little bit to just go back and see her and cheer her up. And unfortunately, she didn't survive that year and died. But yes, Vilfort got one, and the other was
Jensen.
John Jensen. How could I forget one of the most famous goals ever scored in North London? Or you would have thought so from the way Arsenal fans raved about it. But yes, John Jensen, who could do everything. I saw a clip actually a couple of days ago where he humorously said to, I think it was Schmeichel said, that's right, he and Schmeichel still play golf together, and Schmeichel always said, you know, I don't know why you were surprised, that was what I was brilliant at. I think he's only scored 2 goals. He scored 2 goals for Denmark, but that in half a century of games, and that made him prolific compared with Arsenal.
As he shoots, there's a German, I think it's Effenberg, who just falls down in front of him. It's really strange. Effenberg just stays on
almost
his
helps
feet.
him.
I thought that was a tactic. I thought that was a German tactic.
Well, let him shoot.
Let him shoot.
But in actual fact, it was one of those that when you catch it, you know, and it's only going one place. It was just a dream strike, really, wasn't it? And so there were the 2 goals, and they were against the run of play, but And the Germans did play well, but you know how when a goalkeeper is the hero of a match, you piece together all his saves, and you know in your heart that most of them he should have made. You know, like tip overs and things like that, which are hard not to make if you're a decent goalkeeper with good reflexes and strong hands. But some of these were really exceptional saves. This was not just a collection of saves. This was a collection of goal savers. And it's amazing. I mean, he won Manchester United the Champions League in 1999, 7 years later. And he definitely won Denmark that cup with his performance that day.
He filled the goal, didn't he? He
filled the goal, yeah.
He's big guy. And he makes himself even bigger.
No Man United fan will ever have it. You know, I've said once or twice, you know, when De Gea was at his peak, I said, you know, he's up there with Big Schmeichel, and they won't have it because they saw a lot of him. And sometimes Edwin van der Sar, you know, I said, you know, he was good. He was underrated goalkeeper. And they said, yeah, he was good. He was very, very good. But don't compare anyone with Schmeichel. Don't even compare the late, great Harry Gregg with Schmeichel, say the old timers.
The
hero of Munich.
Definitely. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I spoke to Harry Gregg once. I don't think he was too pleased with me. I'll leave that to one side. Well, I'll leave it to one side. And I feel bad about it as well. So I perhaps wasn't as respectful as I ought to have been. And
you accused him of running a bakery.
Yeah. You asked him to make you a sandwich.
Something like that. No, I critiqued one of his friends, and he just.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he just thought, and it wasn't him. I had the utmost respect for Harry Gregg. Genuinely, I always have done as a boy. Wonderful. You know, my generation still remembers all the heroes of the Busby Babes and so on.
Yeah.
Anyway, as we always do on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, we don't just look at the match, the iconic match, but we also try and look at the context around which the match was played. In terms of the musical soundtrack, which we'll come to in a moment, but this was a front page of The Guardian the day after, so this would have been the 27th of June. It shows John Jensen celebrating seconds after his championship clinching goal against Germany. Kim Vilfort scored the other Danish goal. So arguably they would have won with just the John Jensen goal, I think is what they make the point they make. Says Denmark, who only qualified for the European Championship when Yugoslavia were banned 9 days before the competition began because of its civil war, beat the world champions Germany 2-0 in the final in Gothenburg last night. The first goal came after 18 minutes when John Jensen scored with a powerful shot from just inside the area. Kim Vilfort ensured Denmark's victory when he scored with a shot which was deflected off the post 12 minutes from time. It was a brilliant deflection, if I might say so. Anyway, the Danes, who had defeated the favourites and holders Holland in the penalty shootout in Monday's semi-final, were once again indebted to the brilliance of Peter Schmeichel, the Manchester United goalkeeper. The game was Denmark's first in a major final, while Germany were playing their 10th. Denmark.
Where on the page was that?
That was on the front page, remarkably.
I'm surprised. And but a long way down, below the fold.
No. It's the central photograph in the, or the main photograph, if you like. The main story is US ready to relieve Sarajevo. So the Balkans conflict is going on there. Yeah. But the main photograph is of John Jensen celebrating. And then there's a second lead, which is City wipes 2 billion off the BP stock value. But apart from that.
Well, in those days, 2 billion was a lot of money.
It still is, mate.
He said, I told that story about President Ronald Reagan, who said something about it. He was in a conversation with someone once, and he said, well, you know, you spend $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and sooner or later you're talking quite a lot of money. Anyway, go on.
Well, there is a review inside by David Lacey, who's I'm sure is a journalist that you know very well.
Oh, I was his underling, yeah.
it says inspired, and here we come with the Hans Christian Andersen bit, of course.
Yeah,
It's
yes.
always made for the headlines. Inspired fairy tale enters
Yes.
Danish folklore, which is a great heading, I think. It's a really good one. And it shows a whole team there celebrating. You've mentioned Vilfort, Kim Vilfort's goal. I think that unity was as much for Vilfort and what he was, because I think he missed, it was a semi-final against the Netherlands.
Yes, he missed one game,
out.
you're right,
Yeah.
when he went back to see his daughter.
And I think I've never thought of the Danes as being very emotional. But compared to the Swedes, they are. Compared to the Swedes, who are much colder.
I'm sure that's true, but the thing I'd like to it's just occurred to me actually that they were also deep. They didn't behave like professional footballers. I mean, they played like professional footballers, but they behaved like people who recently emerged from amateurism, like rugby players were 20 years ago, people of 10, 15 years ago. They're rounded men, And I remember it was in 1992, there was a referendum on what at the time was probably called either the Common Market or the EEC, but it was the European Union. And Denmark had a referendum on a particular concept, which was how much devolution. I can't remember the name that was given, the jargon that was given to it, but it was quite a complicated concept of devolution of power while remaining in a union. And, a debate that's still going on today. And we went on a press open day, and the Danes, this was another thing that was different for us as journalists covering the tournament. There was none of this 2 players chosen by the FA as you got with England until Southgate came along. And stiff, starchy, don't ask about this and don't ask about that. The Danish political lobby correspondents, or whatever they're called in Denmark, the big hitters of the political media came over and were asking the Danes all about, and I sat in on a lot of the press conferences as they were being asked, what do you think about this concept of how much power should be devoluted? And they all spoke fluently about it. Whereas English ones or Scottish, you could imagine looking a bit embarrassed and saying, well, I'll leave that to the government, and really crapping themselves. The Danes were happy to talk about it. So they were deep human beings, and deep and textured human beings as well as heroes. And it was so refreshing for us as British journalists, to experience that and to mingle with them and to feel, we can ask them anything we like. This was in a hotel in a park in Göteborg, and it was it must have been towards the end of the tour, and then sort of knockout stages. And they're all sitting around the swimming pool in the park with tourists walking past, and honestly, it was from a different time. And when you think back to the rather tasteless luxury hotels that England and 1 or 2 other countries stay in at
France.
Tournaments. Yes,
this time around.
Yeah. And you think, you look back to that and you think, well, maybe they have the right idea.
Doesn't all of this make us jealous of Scandinavian social democracy?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Or certainly admiring, yeah.
I'm not so sure about that, Tim, because I think it's a fragile thing. When I first went to Denmark, I loved the country. I hitchhiked actually from the southern border of Jutland, Germany, through into Denmark, and I hitchhiked all the way up to the top of Jutland to Frederikshavn, where then I caught a ferry to Göteborg for the first time. So I actually went to university initially in Göteborg. And I thought it was, wonderful, quiet, very quiet. It was like a a Lego country for me. That's what it was. You had all these little sort of cottages that were detached cottages all the way in the sort of countryside and on the suburbs. Everything was like a model town. You know the way that we look at a village with thatched roofs and we say chocolate box. Well, the whole of Denmark was chocolate box, as far as I could see from Jutland, anyway. And the people, I got lifts. I always judged a place by the speed with which I got a lift somewhere. So I thought, yeah, nice little place. But then, and I used to go there for their equivalent of Glastonbury, which was Roskilde Festival, every year. We used to, for Swedes coming down. See, for Swedes, Denmark is the first port of entry into Europe. For Swedes, Denmark is the most northerly European country, whereas for us, it's the most southerly Scandinavian country. If that makes sense. Yeah. So for us coming from Sweden, we'd go, oh, wow, we're going to Copenhagen, hurrah, hurrah! We're going to it was going to be fun. They weren't as stiff as we were, and so on. They were more continental about them. I always loved Denmark, but the politics has taken a lurch to the right, and that's one thing. But when you notice the change on the streets of Copenhagen, as I noticed when the last 2 or 3 times I've been there,
so you wouldn't get as many lifts these days. It would take you longer.
Not in Copenhagen, I wouldn't. Not in Copenhagen. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but in Copenhagen there was a real sense of hostility. But then again, I don't live there because my youngest brother does, and he's believe it or not, he's my second youngest brother, forgive me. He's a murder squad policeman in the Copenhagen police force, and probably the strongest person, by the way, in there.
People write TV serials about him. Isn't that all the rage?
Not yet. I told him to write one. Not yet. They haven't written one about him, but it is all the rage. That kind of Scandinavian detective stories at the day.
I got a great pitch for you. It's a mix between Luther and Wallenstein. We can't fail.
Well, I like the pitch. It would have been done with a little bit more of a sing-song in the accent. Do you know that I was in a Danish crime thriller? Do you know that?
No, there are so many sides to the Renaissance man that is Dotun and Tim.
No, this is true.
Did Tennessee Williams write it?
No, this was written by one of the guys. Do you remember the Dogma Film Cooperative? The Dogma. So Lars von Trier, who he went on to do, his real name just Lars Trier, but he added the von in to make himself seem as a little bit a being of noble birth, because that's what von means. But I play in a scene against the late Michael Elphick. So they brought Michael Elphick over as the main detective. It's a film called The Element of Crime in English. In Danish, it's sort of like I can't remember what they call it.
Did Michael Elphick get so much into the method that he learnt the language?
Well, he loved me because there's this great scene with me. He comes in and he shows his ID that he's a policeman, and I'm behind a screen and I stamp the screen. Do you know what I mean? Rather than stamp his ID, I stamp the screen, and then I said, the new sheriff has come into town, and I can't remember what the rest of my lyrics are. But that was shot in Copenhagen, and I had a lot of fun doing it, by the way. A lot of fun doing it. But like I say, these places change, and I think the nature of Denmark has changed. Maybe they loved being, just going back to what you were saying, Paddy, they love being in the European Union. So
they came in with us, in 1773.
But they never had the same negative attitude towards it as we did. So the British papers here, you can go over the course of the 40 years and you won't find probably more than 1 or 2 articles in the British press that does anything but criticises the European Union, whereas they were much more into it being a central part of Europe, because of course it gave them a higher status. Like this football match that we're saying, suddenly we're referring back to a football match from almost 30 years ago, 29 years ago, and we're referring to it because of all the European Championships. That one, and maybe the Greek success a few years later, stand out, and it gives them a higher status than then perhaps certainly than their league deserves. Beyond FC Copenhagen, there ain't a huge amount. Aarhus ain't bad as a football team, but there aren't.
Aarhus.
Or Hughes. Yeah, it's not our Hughes.
In the middle of our street.
Of our street.
Works.
Very good, very good.
How do you say Brondby?
Brondby, yeah, that's
Brondby.
right. Brondby is right.
Brondby.
Yeah,
Brondby.
Brondby.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brondby is right, actually. It means something village. I don't know what the B part means village. Should we have a look at the music charts now that Tim has guided us there?
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to find anything that gets Mr. Barclay moving like Just Like Eddie.
Oh,
do you remember with Just Like Eddie?
Whenever you're sad, whenever you're blue, whenever your troubles are heavy.
Exactly.
No, but there's a good one actually. I noticed, you sent me a little sneak preview of this, and I noticed there's 3 heavy metal numbers in, so it's good stuff. Anyway,
and did you notice those 3 heavy metal numbers are in sequence? I think they're 15th, 16th, and 17th, which makes
mid-table mediocrity.
Well, I was thinking each person went and bought 3 records at the same time. Each of those. Well, that's what I suspected.
They were doing three for a $5.
Maybe. And one of those, I hasten to add, was a dreadful. Given that I was bigging them up just the other day with Tim, Guns N' Roses.
Rubbish. I know. It's
terrible.
Take it away.
I will say, in their defense, they made the mistake that everybody who tries to do not knocking on heaven's door makes, which is Leave It Alone. It's a song that Bob Dylan wrote for himself. It suits his voice, suits his temperament. Don't try and cover knocking on heaven's door, because
take those amplifiers off of them.
Yeah, maybe. It's not as bad though. Given we were talking about Just Like Eddie Cochran, it's not as bad as the number 2 song, which is Nick Berry, former East Ender, and now a policeman in a 50s kind of costume drama. Nick Berry doing Wrecking Buddy Holly's Heartbeat. That is unforgivable. Surely,
it's in poor taste. I agree. I think covers are usually a mistake, with the possible exception of Rolf Harris's Stairway to Heaven. But
how does that affect you blokes? It makes us wonder.
No,
it's one of my favourite moments.
It's true. But what was the number 1 at the time?
Well, the number 1 is interesting because for my generation, I was born in 65.
Yeah.
So we kind of got into punk a little bit later, like 78. Mm-hmm. And some people said that punk was like a reaction against progressive rock. Mm-hmm. And for our generation, it really wasn't, because we'd never heard progressive rock, and it wasn't aimed at us. It was all albums anyway.
It just seemed like a reaction in the same way as the 70s seems like a reaction to the 60s.
What it was a reaction to
just
for our generation.
Excuse for pretentious people to theorize, in my opinion.
Indeed.
But anyway, go on.
But what the thing was a reaction to from my generation was 70s easy listening.
Yeah.
Which kind of dominated everything. And it's after doing this with you, Dotun, and some of the music journalists that we've had on, Paolo Hewitt and Simon Price, I understand this a little bit more, the industry bit of record industry, what sells. Because even people like, say, Elton John, I think he grew up inspired by great stuff. Mm-hmm. But that easy listening thing was what sold.
He's lost his way.
Yeah.
Somebody from the record company. I mean, for the
exactly.
And I apologise. We'll come back to you, Paddy. Just looking at The One by Elton John at number 10. Somebody from the record company told not only him but told Bernie Taupin. This is what hurts me. Fair enough. Elton wants to go and be all schmaltzy, but what happened to Bernie Taupin here?
But this happened to Rod Stewart as well in the mid 70s. He came up playing R&B, and just what sells is that. So everything went into that easy listening thing, and my generation hated it. And then suddenly now in '92, it's all come back. I mean, what the number 1 record is Erasure doing ABBA tributes. my generation just despised ABBA, and then suddenly you get into the early 90s, and I remember all these documentaries that started turning up saying, yeah, ABBA were really cool and they were really great. The Carpenters, weren't they fantastic? No, they're horrible. It's just schlock. It's shit, with the odd good tune thrown in.
All right,
this chart is just full of the 70s revisited. The
lot of people
70s easy listening revisited.
A lot of people who are supposed to be cool and edgy sound to me like they're singing standards. Amy Winehouse would be the perfect example. If I didn't know that she was, that God rest her soul, that she was covered in tattoos and, deliberately sort of, it seemed to me, aggressive looking, what the fuck are you looking at? Look about her. I would think she was, somebody who came up with Tony Bennett and Andy Williams,
I think there's edge in the stuff.
Very melodic.
I think there's truth in the stuff. It's why Tom Jones says the one person that he really would love to sing with is Amy Winehouse. So, and Tom Jones has a great voice and got moved into schlock.
Yeah.
But I think there's reality in Amy. I think it's truth, which is why it works.
I think it's slightly more than that, because they remixed it for a younger audience, first of all, and there was a synergy coming together, exactly as you say, Paddy. If you imagine, who would have thought that Tony Bennett would be doing duets with Lady Gaga?
Yeah.
See, at this time,
I wasn't criticizing Tony Bennett or Andy Williams.
But when you say that, for you, Amy Winehouse was a kind of a reference back to another area of melodious music. I think that's all right, because they were acknowledging it and they were almost coming closer together.
Yeah.
So if Frank Sinatra had been around, he would have done a duet with it.
I don't see anything. It was funny. I was listening to an interview the other day with Frankie Boyle, the comedian.
Of course.
Really off-color comedian, it tells some terribly, what for me are sick jokes, but it was a fascinating interview, because the interviewer, that Theroux bloke, the
Louis Theroux,
the son
Louis Theroux,
of the talented one, and he's
I've interviewed the talented one, by the way. He loves Nigerian women. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, well, you could tell he's a shagger from reading these books, But anyway, where were we?
We were talking about Louis Theroux.
Yeah.
Frankie Boyle.
Frankie Boyle. Louis Theroux says, the subject of Frankie Boyle's influences, and he says, it's the same as everybody else. And the first one he mentioned. Now, Frankie Boyle, bear in mind, this is a bloke who's talking about vaginas, but not in a nice way, talking about everything, absolutely, what some people call party mouth humor. And he said his number one influence is P.G. Woodhouse.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't surprise me.
What's wrong with Amy Winehouse, being learning from the greats of two generations before her?
It doesn't surprise you when you hear somebody like David Bowie say that one of his big influences is Jacques Brel, for example. It doesn't surprise you, does it? Because there are all these gems who are not appreciated in their time, and so lose out for subsequent generations. But when one or two people pick them up, and then we realize what geniuses they were, we go back in time. So it doesn't surprise me that there are a couple of decent tracks here. There are a lot of covers, and the covers are all shocking. I will say that they are all shocking in this chart. I genuinely feel for let's go through some of the. It only takes a minute. I feel for Tavares in that one. Take that, destroy a song that was a decent song. We've already mentioned "Knocking on Heaven's Door," what Guns N' Roses do to a really decent, I think, Bob Dylan song. Then there are a few more.
Please Don't Go is high up. It's Casey and the Sunshine Band, isn't it?
But
I missed that.
Which Please Don't Go is that?
KWS.
Oh, of course, KWS. Yes, you're right. You're right.
Wait, what's Please Don't Go? How does that? What's
Please don't go. Please don't go. Don't go away.
I don't know. No.
You're not missing very
number
much.
5. Yeah, I did miss that one.
I was thinking of Baby Please Don't Go by.
Oh, that's different.
Was
Baby
it
Please,
Van
Muddy
Morrison?
Waters initially.
Yeah, initially.
Baby, please don't go.
Yeah, but then
Yeah.
Van Morrison
Baby,
did
please
it as
don't
well.
go
didn't he?
down
Or
in New
Them.
Orleans. You know,
That's
I
the one.
love you so.
That
Baby,
used to
please
be one of my
don't go.
favorites. Yeah.
But the other thing the thing that is happening, which is new, is the rave stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, but a lot of that is covers here. Incognito, great band doing a cover.
But I don't put them in the rave thing. You've done this before. I think they're a different
acid
thing.
jazz. But rave moved to that though, didn't it? Acid jazz.
Well,
jazz,
Incognito are actually playing their instruments. On the rave, people it's a keyboard and sampling.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that. I think, on a ragga tip, for example, SL2 is a rave track in the chart straight away. I'll give you that. But I wouldn't say that was the only side of rave. There was some live music because raves became a little bit cool, and it's not going out in a field. This isn't going out in a field in the middle of nowhere. This is a rave in London taking over a warehouse or whatever it might be. They always had live bands on as well. They had live bands to the side of.
It's a big moment for me because I'm 27 and I'm feeling old because
you are old. You're
at 27. Well, because this was the first youth culture I thought that had come in with the music. Yeah. You had to be off your face in order to enjoy it.
No, you didn't.
You really did. I remember going to see D-Light at Brixton. I remember going to see D-Light at Brixton Academy, and they weren't very good. And then there was a rave afterwards, and I thought these noises. It just reminded me of so much of a little spell I spent working in a factory. Yeah. There is if you're not absolutely off your face, this is just unbearable. Yeah. And that's the first time youth culture had made me feel old.
Do you know who the promoters were to a lot of these raves? The promoters were drug dealers.
Oh, really?
That's why they were drug dealers. Yeah. So they're the ones that had the money, and they're the ones that used to shout acid. They were like saying, "Come and get it, bring your money." And for them, selling the drugs or putting on the raves was just a way to sell their drugs. It was an opportunity to go and sell their drugs and say, "Look, you've got to be off your face." Well, I'm not ashamed to say my missus is, the guy who put together the money for her first album. Drug dealer. That was weed in those days. Nevertheless, drug dealer. Drug dealers. That's what they did. They invested in music.
He's a good. He's Ebenezer Good. Who was that? Ebenezer Good.
I can't remember that one. Yeah, of course I remember that actually. Yeah,
it was a huge hit.
It was.
From the Shaman. I remember being at Crystal Palace once, and the referee made a decision I didn't like. And they all started up with "He's a cunt, he's a cunt." The referee's a cunt, and it's perfect.
Hey, that's
pop culture, football. That works.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to keep that in, Mark. That's up to you.
but you get the likes of The Influence and "Move Me No Mountain" by Soul to Soul in the charts, 45 and 46.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Well, Soul to Soul.
Yeah, 89. Soul to Soul was just everywhere.
Best thing.
You couldn't move without Soul to Soul. Why didn't it last?
Well, I would say that Soul to Soul, when they blew up, first of all with what's that one? Oh, I can't remember what it's called now. But the big one that blew up with was first of all "Keep On Moving" and then "Back to Life." But before that, they'd done a song with Rose Windrush. I can't remember what it was called now. And that was their trajectory. But they had their own sound, and this is from what we call the rave scene. Yeah, or the club scene more, if you like.
Yes.
So than the rave scene. They dominated with their own sound. Everybody jumps on their own sound very quickly. All the record companies want their equivalent of Soul to Soul to basically just do a copy of the Soul to Soul sound. Dinah Brown and Barry K. Sharp, "Eating Me Alive" at number 53 in the charts, is one of those groups that got a deal, because Barry K. Sharp's actually he's a fashion designer. But he teamed up with this woman called Diana Brown, and basically what they did was just go and do a Soul to Soul sound. There's a few songs in the charts that are very much like that. Des'ree, "Why Should I Love You," still on that kind of Soul to Soul tip as well. On Vogue, My Loving, they basically stole the Soul to Soul sound for their first single, Hold On. So there's a lot of like Soul to Soul influences. But then Jazzy decides, I'm going to move elsewhere. I'm going to expand the Soul to Soul sound, which, you know, got to give him props for wanting to do that, not wanting to sort of seem as if he's following everybody else. But there's a danger in that your fan base wants to hear the Soul to Soul sound from the original people. If you're the Beatles and you're lucky enough, you can move away from the sound, the rock and roll Tamla Motown sound that you broke through with. If you're not lucky enough, you're always, you know, trying to get back that audience. It's going to be difficult over the course of time. It will be difficult, yeah. I think that's what happened here. So what they've done, in a way, they've returned to the Lovers Rock roots of Soul to Soul, because even though they're like a club band, they've got their roots in Lovers Rock. That's why Karen Wheeler was the first main singer, or the singer that blew up with Keep On Moving and Back to Life. But she comes from the Lovers Rock world. She used to be in a group called Brown Sugar in the Lovers Rock world. And here they've got Kofi, who is an original singer from Brown Sugar, the same group as
Karen Wheeler.
Sorry?
As Karen Wheeler.
Yeah, as Karen Wheeler. Sorry, apologies. As Karen Wheeler, she's from exactly the same
I
group.
live in your brain sometimes, rent free.
know.
You're very generous like that.
I was thinking, and then you said something, and I thought I heard right. Anyway, she's from this very same group, and she's the one that's lead singing on this track. So they're going back to the Lovers Rock roots, but not quite the Soul to Soul sound, is how I would describe it at this point. Yeah. Yeah, what a chart. Well, what can we say about the charts? I'd give it, you know, sort of 6, 7 out of 10, but not you two, I imagine.
No, I'd give it 2. I don't know.
2?
Yeah, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Read it string by loose ends. I thought you
liked.
Yeah,
I like that. I do like that.
You see? Yeah. So there is something there.
Yeah, there's something there, but not enough. And last week we did 1968, for crying out loud, you know.
Yeah.
OPP, Naughty by Nature. Come on, man. Naughty by Nature, OPP.
Pat, did you have a moment, because you're part of that generation who are if not pioneers of youth culture, you're coming along quite close to the explosion of Elvis. Did you have a point where you stepped off, when you're following it for a certain amount of time, and then suddenly it doesn't speak to you in the same way?
No, I was a bit like you in that I became young. You know, I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. Another
I love that line.
Son, my
great
back
line.
pages, what a great line. And I used it in a book to describe Alex Ferguson. I had a hell of a job getting permission from Dylan's mob to use the 2 lines.
My goodness.
Anyway, it was I was sort of middle-aged when I was 18, had kids when I was, or at least my wife did, when I was 20 and 21, 22, something like that. And you know, I used to wear cardigans. You know, now I wear cardigans in the hope of looking younger. But in those days, I wore them to look middle-aged, look like a granddad. And so, you know, you've got to remember that the beginnings of youth culture, that if you, I don't know how you define it, but I suppose you start with Bill Haley and then Elvis and then the, you know, Cliff Richard, Marty Wilde, blah, blah, blah. And eventually you get to the Beatles. So what you've got to remember is that the Beatles had to be a hybrid. They had to do nice melodious songs like Yesterday and mix them in with, you know, the Chuck Berry songs that they liked and so on. Same with the Rolling Stones. If you go back to the Rolling Stones, a lot of it is clever music that anybody could, you know, of any age could like. So it you know, that journey of music, it appears still to be going through a transition in 1992, almost. That maybe I'm stretching a point there, but so youth culture didn't really hit you. Yes, when you were young in the 60s, you could. There were places called discotheques where you could go out and feel that you weren't being peered at by older people to make sure you didn't do anything wrong. So there were sort of differences there, but you could buy records, you know, or you wanted to buy records rather than have them bought for you. Davy Crockett. Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. See, neither of you two won't know what the hell I'm talking about. But
No, we
I
know it
actually
all.
do.
Yeah, I do as well.
People of my age, you know.
Yes, I'm sorry, I
and
actually
it's
do.
funny. It's funny. Today I found a country and western country rock version of that, while idly flipping through Apple Music. But although other musics, of course, are available. But no, it wasn't like that, and it wasn't until I didn't really feel energized by music. I didn't feel, my music has arrived, until the two waves that you alluded to, which were punk and heavy metal. I felt at last they're cutting out all the melodious shit, and they're giving you music that makes you bounce around, and that was all I really wanted. That I wanted from music. It's something that would make me, move like this. A bit like the old joke about how do you torture a Scotsman? You get out a hammer and you nail his foot to the floor, and then play a Jimmy Shand record.
I like that. I was going to reference Cumberland Gap.
Oh yes, Lonnie Donegan.
Well, once you mentioned Davy Crockett,
yeah,
I thought, let me show my skills.
Well, Lonnie Donegan's "Tom Dooley" was one of the great songs of my youth. That was a wonderful song. But Lonnie Donegan was, I think, a Glaswegian-born Londoner. But like everybody else, sang in an American accent, as they still do, of course.
Well, he took the mickey out of himself because...
Oh, yeah, he was great for that.
When he did the Battle of New Orleans, he said,
yes,
this Battle of New Orleans was fought between the Yankees and the Brits. And then he'd say, and the British came out ignominiously.
He was funny.
He was funny. He had a sense, and he was, very clever, I thought, actually, precursor to the likes of Chaz and Dave, who had a sort of a sense of folk music, American.
I don't believe you like Chaz and Dave. I love Chaz and Dave.
Oh, well, Tim loves them even more because they're right up his street.
There's no pleasing you, Pat. We're both big fans of Chaz and Dave.
I was going to say something about the punk earlier on. You said, Pat, that oh gosh, what was the phrase you used? We were talking about how these things develop and come.
They sort of they developed gradually and evolved rather than suddenly picking up Beethoven, throwing him out and bringing in the Sex Pistols. It wasn't just like that.
It was the reaction against heavy or prog rock that we were talking about at the time.
It certainly seemed that way.
Look, a lot of punks said, I mean, the Clash famously on which Complete Control shout out, "No more guitar heroes," just to let you know that we're
while Mick is striking a pose.
Of course, but we didn't consider him like a guitar hero. He was a punk hero first and foremost. But that informed us as to who not the enemy was, but who the punk rock should be comparing themselves to. Because all music, they always find somebody to react against or something to react.
Nothing dates like the recent past.
That's true.
And that's why a lot of musicians do all this, the battling, going back to the old days when one musician would say something about another musician, then they'd record a record that was, dissing the other musician, that go backwards and forwards. And that's part of what grime music is today, that, you diss each other, but it keeps the sales going on and on. I would say, if anything, if there was one thing that punk was a reaction to, that was the misery of growing up young in Britain in the mid-70s, where the best option, as the Clash so eloquently put it in career opportunities, was either to go on the dole or to go and join the army. That was what it was a reaction to. I don't think it was as much a reaction.
But things got worse, didn't they? I remember being a kid, and what none of us wanted was a dead-end job. I don't want a dead-end job. By the early 80s, the concept of the dead-end job doesn't exist anymore. Exactly. There's having a job and there's not having a job.
That's been the biggest change, it seems to me, in my lifetime. that I can remember that. Every kid wanted to be an engine driver, but if their parents had thought about that, they would have been aghast. They wanted them to be a school teacher, a bank teller, or something like that. Now, if you could get a job as an engine driver, you'd be very happy. And that's I'm talking about graduates. So. Which I wasn't, but I mean, you're absolutely right, Tim. That's something that I, as an old person, I don't have a conscience about it. By the way, I'm getting a bit sick of this business of trying to open up a sort of war on not war, but a sort of old people have got loads of money, therefore why don't we tax them and take some of it? Well, they can fuck off. Because, in my opinion, I've saved all these young people. You ask young people now. You're talking earlier about all the travel that you've done, and all that. I didn't see foreign soil till I was 25 and married with 2 kids, and I went for 5 days. 5 days in Benidorm with my wife. 19 quid for 5 days, all in. Full board that was, and I never saw I went to Thailand a few years ago. I was in my 70s before I went to Thailand. I didn't have a fucking gap year, a gap between what? There was no gap for me. I had to keep swimming, until or sink, so I've been very, very lucky, but it really annoys me when old people of my age and type are sort of looked on as cash cows. I mean, I've only just got enough. If I live for another 10 years, and don't say anything, you two, because this is being recorded.
Saying a word.
If I live for another 10 years, I'll be okay. But if I live for any longer than that, I'll be in this shit. So, please don't take away. I've worked all my life.
To tell you this.
If you do pop off in the next 10 years, Pat, can you remember us in your will?
You can have my football program.
I think I was expecting you to say you can fuck off.
No, seriously. I would. Somebody is going to be lucky, and you two boys can put in bids. Somebody's going to get my collection of world soccers.
Ooh,
now that is worth having. Going back to 1970s.
Great.
With, I don't think, a break. I still get it. I still get world soccer.
That's amazing.
And it's going back maybe 40, 50 years of world soccer. It's more or less unbroken. Okay, some of them have got beer spilt on them, but
that's all right. Do you know, I hate to tell you this, just to round up this conversation. I hate to tell you this, and I do want you to live as long as you possibly can.
Thank you.
However, the government has just put in a consultation, as they like to consult us first of all.
Yeah.
And the consultation is about increasing the thresholds for free medical prescriptions from 60 to 66.
Oh, that's no problem for me. Listen, I'm very happy with that. Make it 73. Just don't make it 74.
Very good point.
No, it's funny actually. People of my age are all saying, "Yeah, put up the Freedom Pass threshold."
Get rid of it.
At least, if they're 73, they'd say, "Oh, 72 even." But no, we, you do get to that. You do get to that stage. But God, it's fantastic when you can look back over things like 1992 and remember so much. And I've actually, obviously, this is before we started on the music. This is where we came in, and there's just one little memory which may tell us a little bit about the times. And it's not necessarily a particularly nice story, but. Do you mind if I tell you it?
Please.
Because it pertains very much to the times. I was going out with a girl called Lucy Swan, very nice girl who, and we lived together in a beautiful part of North Buckinghamshire, and she had no interest in football at all. So far, everything's great. And when I didn't like to go away from home for the 6 weeks that major tournaments involved, and so I said to her, "You must come out, and we'll spend a few days together during the tournament." And as it turned out, I chose a period when there would be 2 matches involving British teams. There were one involving England in Malmo. I can't remember who it was against, and one involving Scotland in Norrköping. So I thought it'd be a good chance. We'd hire a car and we'd drive up through Sweden, and she'd see these 2 matches. Anyway, she said, "Well, I'm not really that interested in football, but yeah, it'd be nice to get together for a few days and see the country." So we met in Malmo, and she arrived just after. She arrived late in the evening, just after the England fans had rioted. And Malmo was a sea of shattered glass, or so it seemed to us, the central area. And it was really horrible. My main memory is of us scuttling into a restaurant. We were there with Jonathan Holmes, who both of you may know. He's Gary Lineker's agent, and a great guy, and he was there with a couple of friends, and he'd found this restaurant, and we scuttled into this subterranean restaurant off a square which was covered in glass. And as we ran into this restaurant to escape the aggro, I'll never forget a bride. It was obviously in one of the hotels on this square. There was a wedding reception, and the bride was legging it in a long dress. It's so difficult for her to run. And I thought, what a for her day to be spoiled like this, and all the guests' day to be spoiled. Anyway, it was a horrible experience, but I was used to it. I wasn't bothered, but I was worried about Lucy, especially as I'd said to her, "No, don't worry, football's fine, it's all exaggerated and all that." Well, it wasn't. And in the morning, she said, "Well, what are we doing today?" I said, "Well, we'll go and have a look around Malmo, and then later we'll drive up to Norrköping." And she said, "What are we doing there?" I said, "Well, I've got tickets for Scotland against Germany." And she wasn't an aggressive girl, but she said no. She said, I've had it up to here with football. You told me it'd be great. It was a nightmare last night. I do not want to see another football fan as long as I live. And I said, well, but it'll be totally different. Honestly, I promise you, it will be completely different. She said, but there'll be all these Germans and Scottish fighting. I said, they won't. I promise. I just give it a chance. And she said, well, yeah, all right. And we drove up, nice drive. And we arrived in Norrköping about on the day of the match. And there were all guys in kilts lolling around with drinking out of bottles and God knows what else. And I could see her looking at this and thinking, oh, God. And anyway, we get to the hotel. It's swimming with Scotland fans and beer. And they grabbed her and said, oh, you can do better than him, Hen, and come with us. And I said, well, actually, I've got to go to the press box. Would you mind? And they had a taxi. And so I tore off her ticket and I said, I'll see you there. And she disappeared into this taxi with all these drunken Scots looking a bit, oh, God. And I saw her at the ground. And she said, what a time we had. We stopped off at a bar on the way. They refused to let me buy a drink. They were absolutely lovely. And in the morning, after the game, we went again. We saw the Scottish fans and the Germans sort of getting exchanging songs and shirts and everything else and falling into fountains and all that kind of stuff. But absolutely lovely atmosphere. And in the morning, she said, I'm sorry, you were right. They are different. And I said, they're all different. They're all okay apart from one country. Now, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that to make it sound anti-English because it wouldn't be that bad now. The contrast would not be as stark now, but it was then. And I think it was only a year after that that the English fans wrecked a stadium in Dublin. So, some of these, was it 1994 when the American World Cup? North American World Cup, United States World Cup. And I got to know the officials there, and they knocked a huge, when England failed to qualify, they knocked literally millions. And, bear in mind, this is 25 years ago. They lost, they wiped several £1 million off their budget because they knew they weren't going to have to lose everywhere from Orlando to Portland or wherever the tournament was.
I was back last year when England lost the semi-final against Croatia, and I was really pleasantly surprised to see the atmosphere out on the streets. There was a party going on even after the defeat. Are either of you worried about what could happen if England lose in the semi-final or in the final, or even if England win? Are either of you worried about possible consequences?
I'm not, because I think what we've been through in the pandemic, I think there will be glorious celebration, but I think very much football, the hooliganism that Pat was referencing there, and by the way, I do like the way you say Norrköping, the correct way, rather than Norrköping, as some people would say. Yeah,
I'd do it.
Yeah, I think, as Pat says, that belongs to a different era. I think what has happened in this, as I said to you before, Tim, I'm a firm believer that what this England squad has gone through reflects something that has changed in our country and will be more profound as we start analysing particularly the taking of the knee, which I think has unified football against the booers. I wouldn't call them hooligans, no, not at all, but people who've been booing. The sight of these young men representing your country being booed because they've taken a stance on a social aspect of their country that they want to make known, I think is going to resound beyond this. Beyond this tournament.
I agree. I agree with the basic thesis of that. The only thing I would say is that the booers, my reading of it is slightly different. The people who were booing under a misapprehension, what you would call a misapprehension, what they would call seeking of clarification. That clarification has now been provided, and fewer people are now booing. But I think that they were right to ask for that clarification, because if the taking the knee had signified, as a lot of people thought, support for the many parasite movements that have grown up under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter, then the booing would have been justified. As it is, I think we had an argument, we had a debate that has now been satisfactorily settled, and it's much healthier to move on from that than on one side drowning out another side. I think and you're making a very good point when you say that we're moving on together now, and this is very, very good, because one side drowning out another is, might be a good thing if the good side wins, but it's much better if everybody else says, "Oh, I see, right," and moves on together, which is what I very much sense is what's happened. So I agree. I agree. I just had that slight tweak that I wanted to.
I think it's
interject.
Perfect. I think your slight tweak is actually perfect, because ultimately we all need clarification as to who we are as England fans, for one thing. And I think the team represents who we are as England fans. And it's not like all the plaudits that have been lauded on Gareth Southgate, his demeanour and manner and his gentlemanliness. I can't see that spilling into a kind of "Come on, England! Come on, England!" Yeah. I can't see that.
I think that multiculturalism has helped in there are a lot of boulders to be overcome in the cause in the pursuit of multiculturalism. Make no mistake about that. But I think that we multiculturalism has certainly helped to, or the sense of inclusivity, or has certainly helped to create in the football industry. And that's why I don't think we understand just how important football and music have been in creating the really healthy society that Dotun describes. It's not the whole of our society, but football, it actually is part of a good thing at the moment, something very good, and something that spilled over to the rugby team as well. And I think, as an old geezer, I can promise you, some things get better.
Wouldn't you
get a lot better?
Wouldn't you just love it, Paddy? Wouldn't you just love it if England fans became the new Scottish fans, if you see what I mean?
I was thinking there, Pat, and I'm looking for a two-word answer here.
Yeah, okay.
Does this team represent you as an England fan?
Fuck off. Hey, come on. To be fair, Tim, you wrote my script. You knew what you were doing.
I just thought that would be a perfect place to end it.
Brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant.
Mark?
Yeah.